Welcome to today's teach-in. My name is Michelle, and I'm with the Membership and Movement Engagement team at AWID. I'm so happy to see all of you here today. I'm based in Singapore, and a quick visual description of me. I've got brown skin and black hair that's about shoulder length, and I'm wearing some gold hoop earrings and a beige shirt. We are really excited to have everyone join us today. And we have this session in French, Spanish, and English with closed captioning and international sign language interpretation. Please go down to the little globe and choose the language of your choice or turn on the CC, just in case you missed our housekeeping video. Today, we also have the chat open, so we encourage folks to share in the chat where you're joining us from. But for everyone's safety, as this event is open to the public, please don't share your email or contact details. If you want to connect, and here's a shameless plug, join us as a member and you can connect directly on AWID Community, our digital platform for members and for the feminist movement. So today we've invited some amazing special guests who've been working on climate justice and organizing around COP for a while. They're going to join us and we look forward to hearing them speak very shortly. As always, we want to remind our audience that sometimes feminism is not perfect. It's a learning journey that we are all on. Not all ideas are shared, and that's okay. If you have questions or comments, please share in the chat. We also have the Q&A. If you need to step away, please do so at the time. Afterwards, this conversation will continue on AWID Community, a member space, another reason to join. So right now, I'm going to pass it on to my wonderful co-host, who is from the team that's been working on COP and has been working around the scenes to put this together. Mati, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And hi, everyone. Welcome. And thanks again for joining us today in Struggle and Solidarity for this important conversation on feminist climate justice. My name is Marta Music. I'm the lead of the Building Feminist Economies team at AWID. Our team works on mobilizing for economic and climate justice, amplifying feminist economic alternatives, and mobilizing and supporting labor movements. I'm white, I have short brown hair with brown eyes and a short sleeve black shirt, and I am based in Barcelona, Spain. And we're gathering today against the backdrop of multiple intersecting crises, which are the direct results of centuries of extractivism, colonialism, racial capitalism, and patriarchy. And these same systems that are fueling the ecological collapse are driving genocides, wars, displacements, and the rise of fascisms across the globe. From Sudan to Congo to Palestine, amongst other territories, we are witnessing unthinkably brutal violence rooted in imperialism, in militarism, in the extraction of land and resources, all of which are deeply related to the climate crisis. And the multilateral systems that are supposed to respond to these crises, from the United Nations to global climate negotiations, are failing. They're failing to protect the most vulnerable, they're failing to deliver justice, they're failing to hold accountable the governments and corporations responsible for ongoing ecocides and genocides, and they're failing to act with the urgency that this moment demands. Some might say that these systems are broken. Others would argue that they're doing exactly what they're meant to do, that is, protect the interests of the powerful, maintain the status quo, and make space for corporate greenwashing while silencing frontline communities, indigenous nations, and grassroots movements. And it is in this context that the 30th annual United Nations Climate Change Conference, also known as COP30, is set to take place in November in Belém in Brazil. And this is not just another annual checkpoint in international climate policy. It is a moment that is charged with geopolitical significance. We have on one hand fossil fuel companies, neoliberal governments, financial institutions co-opting, watering down radical narratives of climate movements while pushing for market-based false solutions to continue profiting from the destruction of people and the planet. And on the other hand, we have movements, indigenous, Black, feminist, anti-colonial, fighting for the total transformation of our economies and societies, as well as redefinition of our relationships to nature, to each other, and to ourselves. And beyond COP30, feminist movements are leading climate justice efforts across the world and mobilizing against extractivism, militarism, racism, patriarchy, and colonialism. They're building power, they're practicing care, they're embodying active solidarity, and more importantly, they're creating alternatives rooted in equity, in justice, in collective liberation, and interdependence. The question that we are asking today is not how to navigate COP30 or like having different technical conversations. As you will see, there are so many webinars happening lately, but rather we're interested to see what are feminists doing inside, outside, and beyond these official policy-making spaces to fight for climate justice. Our goal here is to explore different entry points into feminist organizing for climate justice across different fronts and to get an overview of these different strategies from three incredible feminists whom we have the honor of having with us today. And together, they will help us think about how these different feminist strategies can confront power, center communities on the front lines, and move us closer to a world where climate justice is not a slogan, but a lived reality. And so with that said, let's begin with our first speaker, Mela Chiponda, the director of the Shine Collab. She's a visionary eco-feminist leader with over 20 years of experience working across the African continent and globally on energy, on climate, on land, and water justice. So if I could please have Mela join me here. And tell us a bit about what you do, how it intersects with COP30. There was this incredible feminist energy futures gathering that you held in September. Yeah, would love to hear more about your work and how that intersects with the upcoming COP. As you know, you have 10 minutes. I know that's not a lot, but we will have some time for a Q&A after that. And I will raise my hand once you have 1 minute left so that you know when to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mela. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Matty. And I just want to start about how, the issue of women challenging extractivism and women writing about it as well, and women realizing that this economic system is linked to the death of nature. I want to say the death of nature from the works of Caroline Merchant, who wrote about the death of nature, looking at the feminization of nature, the naturalization of women, and how the women's struggles are so intertwined with what is happening in the ecosystem. And also just, looking at how women have been working on issues related to anti-extractivism, the protection of our ecosystems. We all know the writings of Francois Dubon, who wrote about feminism or death, that the world has to choose between whether they would like to be feminist or embrace feminism, or we just die. And this is because of seeing how this whole system is anti nature and ecosystems, and anti women and other genders as well. And the women who have been writing about all this, they have faced a lot of violence. They have faced a lot of attacks. Of course, we have the most popular or the most notorious of these violence against women who are speaking out against extractivism, from the works of Rachel Carson's The Silent Spring, where she was articulating about the dangers of DDT and how this is killing ecosystems, and how now the spring is quiet because there is death that was happening of the birds that used to sing and all that. And then now, looking at all these violence, that didn't stop there. This violence has seen how women are silenced, particularly in the COP spaces. And I just, want to share what the COP is intended to be, and how this COP is now the difference between the reality that is supposed to be, that is at the COP, and what it was supposed to be. The COP is supposed to be a democratic space to negotiate fair climate action, right? That is the intention of the COP, right? And it is supposed to be centered on common but differentiated responsibilities. And why that is so? Because we all know how this climate space, this climate crisis is connected or is caused by excessive greenhouse gas emissions. And we have countries such as the US, countries such as Britain, countries such as China and Germany, who are historical polluters, particularly the US, which has the most historical greenhouse gas emissions. And this is why the responsibilities are supposed to be differentiated, right? And then the COP space is supposed to be a platform for vulnerable communities, women, indigenous groups, to be able to offer solutions, to recommend solutions to the governments and other players. And it is supposed to be grounded in science, in equity, in justice. And I'm going to just underline science, because we all know that when we talk about science, what comes into our minds is Harvard, is Cambridge, is all these powerful colonial institutions. But we are talking about something scientific that is as well rooted in the indigenous ways of knowing. And what is this COP looking like now? And what are we then supposed to do? We are seeing how in the past years, we have seen how the COP has transformed or has changed. And from the onset, we saw how the people who are impacted by climate change have been sidelined. We have seen very powerful governments and corporations dominating the climate space, and some of them not signing anything, not signing even the Paris Agreement, not signing even the other previous protocols like the Kyoto protocols. They come to dominate, and they come to just oppose, and with a lot of power and a lot of resources, and silencing the voices of the communities, of the indigenous people, of the women whose voices are supposed to be heard. And we have seen how the fossil fuels lobbyists are outnumbering the indigenous delegates, including the delegation from the women's groups. We have seen exclusion through the badges and the closed negotiations. We have seen how this space is closed for the people who are carrying the burden of the climate crisis. And we have seen how the COP space is now a marketplace for false solutions. The carbon markets, the offsets, the techno fixes that are coming. And now, how do we undo this? This is the big question for me. How do we take back the COP? Because it has drifted into patriarchal, profit-driven negotiations. It has drifted so much that even the justice language is now only symbolic, and nothing is acted upon. The women, the indigenous peoples are marginalized in the decisions, and the climate solutions are producing extractivist logic. And now, what is left for us, right? That what should we be doing as we are moving towards Brazil, right? I see an opportunity to recenter people, planet, and justice. I see an opportunity for the indigenous and feminist movements to lead and also, to work on how best can we build voice around, for example, the protection of the Amazon, the protection of the forest in Katanga, in the DR Congo, and also to talk against the violence that is associated with fossil fuels extraction. And we do have the inside and the outside space. And I just want to end by saying that in the inside space, we are supposed to be demanding gender just, people-centered texts. That is what we are supposed to be giving out. And we are supposed to build, before we even go there and during the COP, inside the COP space, to build the Global South feminist and indigenous alliances, because we cannot do this on our own as the feminist movement. And as well, just present storytelling and testimonies to humanize the negotiations, so that the negotiations are not up there and the people are down there. And also, we are supposed to leverage on the side events to give visibility, and that can also be done through the press conferences, that we outspeak what the message is from the corporations. And in the outside of the COP30, we know I spoke about the people not getting badges, but as well, outside the COP30, the people's assemblies, the marches can be strengthened, and build media strategies to expose the false solutions. And lastly, to mobilize transnational ecofeminist solidarity. Thank you so much, Mati, and I'm going to give back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mela, really, for your thoughtful information and for highlighting the corporate capture of the space. It's really appalling to see the stronghold of the fossil fuel industry in the space, and I encourage everyone to follow a campaign called Kick Big Polluters Out. But also, Mela, thank you for outlining pathways of hopes and opportunities for us to explore, and the importance of pushing for those gender just, people-centered text. I think it's also really important, as you said, to center the voices and indigenous knowledges, and decentering modernity, coloniality, and Western thinking altogether, which is one of the roots of the climate crisis. Everybody, we will have time at the end for Q&A, so we also encourage you to write down your questions in the Q&A section below. And in the meantime, I will invite our next speaker, Rowena Buena, calling in from the Philippines. There we go. She's been working in a farmer-led network called MASIPAG for the past 25 years. And Rowena, I know you have so much experience on leading climate justice campaigns and other activities on climate change, adaptation and mitigation strategies. So I will let you take the floor and tell us a bit about what your plans are this year and how you will be engaging in COP. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marty, for the introductions. Good evening, good day, everyone. It's evening here in the Philippines. So I will be sharing with you our experience with regards to participating in COP, and also what are our adaptation mitigation strategies. So next slide, please. Yeah. So MASIPAG, briefly, is a national network of farmers, NGOs, and scientists working towards sustainable use and management of biodiversity. So most of the members of MASIPAG are farmer organization, women organization, youth, and indigenous communities. So we are working with them by protecting and conserving the genetic and biological resources of our country, and through agricultural production and associated knowledge through promotion. So basically, our mission is to improve the quality of life of small-scale resource for farmers. Majority of the farmers in the Philippines are small-scale, and we all know that food are coming basically coming from the 80% or 70% of small-scale producers around the world. Next slide. So briefly, the Philippines, as we all know, is an archipelago. We have 7,641 islands. And why is this important for this discussion? We are in the typhoon belt. So basically, we have around 20 to more typhoons in a year. And in some cases, we have to repeat the alphabet just to give names to typhoons. So that's how frequent our country is being visited by these typhoons. And some of them are in category 5, and these are very destructive. And of course, the Philippines is highly exposed to climate change, being in this typhoon belt position. And we are in the world's 10 countries that are most vulnerable to climate change risk. Next slide, please. So you can see here that the Philippines is one of the countries in Asia, which are in the top 10. And our position, geographical position, there are a lot of hazards. So we have typhoons, we have earthquakes, volcanic eruption, and our social, political, economic infrastructure are making us very vulnerable to these hazards. There are a lot of corruption, there are a lot of poverty, and the capacity, and even the government giving capacity to Filipino people is very low. So that's why we are very prone to these disasters. Next slide. So in agriculture, the impacts, we have rising sea levels, salt water are coming in the farms. There are prolonged drought lasting for about 1.5 years. So this is very destructive for agriculture and food production. We have stronger and more frequent typhoons. Sometimes we have 5 typhoons in 2 weeks, and some of them are category 5 typhoons. Severe flooding. Now in our country, we have this corruption issue because the politicians are funneling funds. We have what we call flood control projects. They are funneling the money for flood control projects to their own pockets. So this is quite this is happening in the Philippines. So next. So for Masipag farmers, this is Masipag has been in this work, basically conservation, since the 1980s, as a result of Green Revolution, the failure of Green Revolution. So Masipag farmers are collecting, breeding traditional rice varieties, corn varieties, and vegetables. They have created a farm ecosystem that is ecological and build social infrastructure to face these impacts. So we have been invited several times already to join COP29, but hearing from partners, from allies, what is happening in COP29, we are not really very keen to join. But in 2024, we have decided to join COP29 and to learn more about the process, and of course campaign for agroecology and the solutions from the ground. So we want to share the impacts of climate change to small-scale farmers and to vulnerable countries like the Philippines. What's this climate change and the climate crisis is doing to small farmers. And of course, what are the alternatives to destructive commercial or conventional agriculture? What are the solutions from the ground? What the farmers are doing, the women, the children, and the indigenous communities what are their solutions? What are they doing from the ground? What the civil society organization and allies networking can work on, we work on together, and of course, demand for accountability and campaign for climate justice. And then at the end of this participation, we also want to think about what are we going to do next, upon hearing this discussion in COP29. Yeah. So our call is human rights must be at the heart of all climate change action and decision making. our experience from the COP29, we are quite overwhelmed when we saw how big COP29 is, how the historical polluters are, basically dominating the discussion and negotiation, and um, most vulnerable countries like Philippines and other small countries are hardly heard in the discussion, no? And like we are just uh, being talked about in loss and damages part of the negotiation. That's very disheartening for countries as like us, and we want to tell to the states that in a position to do so must massively scale up climate finance and funding for loss and damages, so that we can, become uh, not really resilient, but we want to uh, become more ready for this, because we are being affected uh, heavily by climate change. And all states, of course, must commit to fully phasing out fossil fuels in a fast and fair way. However, there are also other projects or other technologies that it's being done now in the country, that's basically removing farms. For example, uh, there are now solar power factories in the Philippines, not farm, but factories. We are talking about thousands of hectares of solar panels replacing productive agricultural lands that is being developed and and are being uh, put up, no, set up by big companies, and the government is approving all those projects. So basically, food sovereignty is being threatened, no? And then, of course, with these big projects, big uh, factories being developed, the civic spaces and militarization is also massive here in the country. Large dams, threatening indigenous communities, threatening women, children, the livelihood of farmers. Like, it's now being threatened. And so there's also threat to rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. Even livestock, no, even animals, they are like we call it here in the Philippines red tagging, that you are like some kind of terrorist, that they are talking about how to fight back, how to make changes, to what's happening. So yeah, next slide please. Okay, I have. So after COP29, we have like profound realization of the impacts of COP to countries like the Philippines. So it's there are a lot of discussion in MASIPAG about if we are going to continue, no. So we also have extensive media mileage. One mainstream media even documented farmer solution, to climate change, and also internal discussion about COP partnership with universities, and documentation of what farmers are doing. Next slide. So is it worth it? No. Is participation worth it? At first, we thought that, are we going to come back? Are we going to join other organizations in in Brazil? And we say yes, but we don't expect too much from the negotiation. We have seen how big the influence of big companies, historical polluters to the negotiation. But as Tatay Lodi said, no, as the farmer that that who is in the COP said, while this corporation pour billions into corporate-driven false solutions, the farmers are already holding real answers. And the earth doesn't need more chemicals or patents. It needs the wisdom of those who live closest to it. So that's his statement of, are we going to join? And on the ground, of course, we still continue to stand firm and continue to struggle against destructive programs and projects that prevent the development of agroecology, food sovereignty, and upliftment of human rights. So I think that's it. We call on climate justice now. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you so much, Rowena, for reminding us that the solutions are on the ground and that alternatives are rooted in our communities and that it's still worth to take part in processes such as COPs. It's really inspiring to see how you're bringing the voices of and demands of rural farmers to official climate spaces and how we have to continue pushing together for more and better funding for loss and damage and historical reparations. So thank you again for being with us today. Our next speaker is our dear Marisa Hutchinson. I don't know if you are here. She's an incredible Afro-Caribbean feminist from Barbados. She's been working with grassroots women, girls, and other marginalized communities in the global south, especially in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, in Asia, and in Africa, building and mobilizing a feminist climate justice movement that reflects their lived realities and those of their communities. She's also a member of the Women and Gender Constituency Facilitative Committee. And the Women and Gender Constituency is one of the official 9 delegations of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it's the official channel for feminist advocacy within that space, for those of you who do not know. And yeah, we would love to hear, about your plans, the relevance of engaging in the UNFCCC process for feminists working on climate justice and economic justice, or not. How you will be engaging in the space this year. What are your plans? So I'll let you take the floor.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone. As Martha said, I am Marissa. I'm wearing a black top with some blue, red, I think gold earrings. And I have natural hair and a short afro twist out. So thank you so much for having me. I won't delay my start, but I'm just going to build on Mela and my colleague Rowena. But I'm going to really speak to the Caribbean more specifically. So with the COP30 coming up, most people would have said that it was a Latin American Caribbean COP. But for us as the Caribbean, we do and are continuing to find challenges in terms of attending. And it isn't just civil society in most cases, but it's also negotiators. Any persons I would have engaged with, there's still a challenge, they're still unsure, unless they're a big part of AOSIS, which is known as the Alliance of Small Island Developing States, which is a small group between Caribbean islands and Pacific Islanders. And I know if we as the Caribbean are getting challenges, others are. It might be the cost, that is a huge issue, whether it's around accommodation or airfare, but also we recognize that in having this conference in Belém, even though it was expected to be, more space specific or civil society, et cetera, we still recognize that as the years go on, there's a shrinking in civic space, and that has been a major concern of observers, civil society, especially for the Caribbean, but also too when it comes to COP, when it comes to UNFCCC, when we speak to stakeholder engagement, this remains one of the challenges of the region. A lot of what is done within that space is mainly at the national or government level, and civil society is left out. Hence why I'm part of the Caribbean Feminist Climate Justice Movement. We were created about 3 years ago to support groups working on gender who are also working on climate, but thinking about how we engage in that space. And I'm one of the founding members of the advisory. One of our key concerns was not just civil society engaging in the space or knowing about the space, but also being present. Through funds with Global Fund for Women, we were once able to engage in person as the Caribbean movement. But that also proved challenging, again, extremely high costs just to get to COPs, and then the accommodation, et cetera, is high. So again, not surprising that it is the same case this year. But again, when we talk about stakeholder engagements, if governments aren't doing well, we recognize that that's the reason why civil society isn't so much engaged. Through AWID, we'll be doing what is known as a resistance hub as the Caribbean to engage building capacity in terms of what is happening on the ground, yes, but also what will be happening at COP, but also trying to build towards a future where the Caribbean is more present in civil society, even engaging with indigenous groups within the region, although very few, there's still that lack of understanding of what is happening at COP, how they can be present, etc. But you're not only hearing it in the Caribbean, again, you're hearing it all over. So from my experiences engaging with COP, it was through my organization, ERA Asia Pacific, International Women's Rights Action Watch Asia Pacific, whereas through a project, we were able to take Indigenous groups or persons working with Indigenous peoples to COP, the COP27 in Egypt and also COP28 in Dubai. And then also a few members attended Azerbaijan last year, but it was a build up. And you see the importance of why civil society needs to be at COP. So first you go in and obviously it's a learning process. You're not really sure how to engage with your government. And what I learned in that space was that some groups, we think that because maybe in my region, the islands are small, it's easy to engage with your governments, but that's not the case. So we recognize that a lot of groups, we were encouraging to go to COP and these spaces, they've never engaged with their government. So that is actually an ideal opportunity for them to engage, whether it's the part of experience and knowledge sharing, which is very important because we recognize that governments often don't know what is truly happening on the ground. And I hope it was okay to say that here, but also that there's definitely a disconnect when it comes to what vulnerable groups on the ground are experiencing and what is happening at the upper level. So yeah, it was really important to have that engagement and to see how it unfolds. And what is interesting as a facilitative committee, as Marcia said, that WGC is this feminist space really to be in when you're at COP. And it's one of the 9 constituencies. There are a number of others. And if you're interested, there's Indigenous caucus. There are persons who focus on local communities and municipalities. There's also research, etc. But there are 9 constituencies, but WGC specifically focus on gender and climate, and gender and climate in the way that how can women be engaged, youth, etc. All those marginalized groups that women often represent and take care of, etc. And I think that is how I really got a true understanding and sense of what the UNFCCC COP is, but also what it isn't. And I think that is also what is key in engaging in this work. It isn't just about showing up and thinking that states have your best interests at heart, because we've learned that before. As I said, within this space, the civic space continues to shrink. And we also have to think about, we're thinking about COP30 now, but for a lot of persons who are still learning what COP is or now new to this space, there's a COP every year, and the upcoming COP will most likely, which is COP31, will most likely be in Australia. So that would also prove difficult for others because it's happening in the global north. Probably expenses will be higher, etc. So that is also something to think about. But so I don't go so much over time and we have space for questions. One of the things I want to say, especially to civil society, is to challenge your governments, raise questions around climate finance. A lot of people wouldn't call it that, but around projects that are specific to climate or the environment that governments hold the resources to. Because within the current times, you know that for civil society especially, civic space is shrinking, but also the resources. And we know that there's been a big change and shift in terms of how we get, especially financial resources to and within our organizations, but also to civil society and the communities that need it, especially marginalized communities. So think about how you engage, but as I said, challenge your government in terms of what financing looks like. They talk a lot about readiness, they talk about adaptation, mitigation and adaptation, but a lot of times communities are unaware of what this means, and it's just these, you know, big UN context terms that are too difficult for them to understand. But also what I like to tell communities is that governments do have resources for financing when it comes to disasters, climate disasters, environmental degradation, etc. But it's about how they use it. And again, that goes back to the lack of community engagement, which is in there. And it's not just that you have to be at COP to engage with your governments. Again, you have to work to engage with them in country. One of the things that we've constantly told governments and challenged them about is thinking about what stakeholder engagement looks like and leaving out stakeholders who are key to the process. So yeah, but also to more specifically for, I think, the global south, what is key when it comes to climate finance And I don't know how many of you know, but loss and damage finance is one of the newer financial mechanisms that is being talked about. And I think my colleague Rowena might have mentioned it, and if she didn't, I will. The Philippines currently engages a lot on loss and damage finance, and a lot of the meetings are constant. The board meetings are held in the Philippines. The last meeting was held very recently in the Philippines, and there was one that happened earlier this year in Barbados. And what is important is about the loss and damage finance, even though the pot that was decided on continues to dwindle, it is held under the World Bank, and the specific protocols or guidelines will be under that World Bank, but they're funds that are supposed to be for communities. So it's key time to ask your governments, where's the climate finance, where's the loss and damage finance, and what does that look like for communities, especially communities like us on the ground who continue to lose our culture, traditions, heritage because of this loss and damage, but especially in my region and also the Pacific and others, I should say, broadly the global south, loss and damage that causes the historical issue of displacement and migration as a result of disasters. And I'll end it there.
Thank you so much, Marisa. You can always count on her to keep it real. But thank you for this important reminder for us to continue engaging within the official UNFCCC space, as complex as the space can be, and for also highlighting the Resistance Hub, which we will come back to a bit later. And with that, I am super happy to open up the floor for questions from our audiences. I see many of you have already written down your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screens. So I'm just going to read some of them out, and then I will let Mela, Rowena, and Marisa pick which ones you would like to address better. We have a question from one member asking, what are your thoughts on AI data farms? We see everyone pushing towards AI, even in our organizations. What is your advice? We have another question on how could countries who do not sign the Paris Agreement and are a big contributor to emissions be held accountable? Do we think advocacy is enough to do this? Which institutions should we target for this accountability work? And then a third question in terms of what could be the calls to action to minimize the effects on natural resources and repair the damages. Yeah, how can we continue raising awareness on these issues? So I will give you a bit of time if you want to, unless you want to take it away immediately.
I want to respond, but I just want to put a disclaimer that nobody is really an expert in COP30 because we've been attending these COPs and we have become like professional COP goers of sorts. But this is very difficult. And the question on how could countries who do not sign the Paris Agreement and be contributors to emissions be held accountable? I think one of the things which are very powerful is to work in solidarity with NGOs, the feminist movements in those countries. Because if we would put pressure from outside, like we go to the COP, put pressure, do a campaign, do all the media work, and we don't do it in solidarity with the people who are in those countries, you could be targeted. That's for starters. That we have seen how there are some activists who are denied entry into some countries because they are considered hostile. And if that could happen to someone who is working as a solo activist, it means that's the end of it. But they cannot deny their citizens entry into their countries. And on the other hand, if the people, the activists, the feminists in those countries would do it alone, they may also face a lot of violence. In some countries, including my own country, you could be arrested, you could face all sorts of harassment. And therefore, it is good to always, when we are putting pressure, to always do it as a collective, as compared to just a single entity. And we all know that because we have done that before. We all know how there was no space for gender in the climate talks. Gender, the women in gender constituency, it came out of pressure, out of a lot of advocacy, out of campaigns. And is advocacy enough? I don't think advocacy on its own is enough. We need more actions. We need, apart from the advocacy campaigns, we need even sometimes to take action where it hurts most, right? Where it hurts most, usually we are met with sanctions, like legal sanctions. We all know how activists are now targeted for all sorts of, lawsuits. We know how Greenpeace is facing a lawsuit of millions. That is also the way that they retaliate. And therefore, we need to do other actions as well. We all know how, for example, a big institution, like, I know we are talking about countries here, but we all know in South Africa how Shell was taken to court and they stopped the exploration of oil. And we all know the cleanup campaign in Nigeria, the compensation that was paid, but this came out of a lot of actions that have been done, and on which institutions. I would say right now the climate discussions, every institution is talking about climate. The World Bank is talking about climate. Every institution, and even the UN spaces, we have seen how everybody is talking, and therefore, even the private investors, the narrative, every narrative is including climate, and therefore, I would say everyone who has access to any institution should maybe do the work so that they face the heat in all fronts. That's what I can say for now. I know there are some people with brilliant suggestions. Thank you.
Marty, with regards to the question about AI, well, ETC has these findings about AI, that's still tied. Still tied to corporate capture, especially using AI to gather data about farming, so that farmers would know how to put pesticides, or how many gallons, to use to use in their farm. And of course, this is not appropriate to the conditions of the farmers, especially in countries like us. So it's like another form of extractivism again, but this time data, from the farmers. And I would also like to add to what Marisa said about Philippines hosting the loss and damage discussion. Actually, yes, I agree with you that it happened here in the Philippines, but of course, civil society organizations are not invited. I think there's only one representative from the civil society organization, and they are in observer status, so not really joining the discussion. No, but based on our experience, this loss and damage discussion, happening at the national and international level, they are not being discussed, or any information is not given to the most vulnerable sector of our country, the farmers, the women, the urban poor communities, the fisher folks. They do not know about this loss and damage fund that's being given to countries like us. And so they don't know where this fund is coming from, or where the government is spending this money on. And sorry, and we are experiencing a lot of damaging impacts of climate change. And they were just saying that Filipinos are very resilient. They will do without all this support, and really it's continuing for many years now. And so that's why we want to continue joining COP, so that these narratives, especially from the uh, big corporations and historical polluters, are being discussed from the international, national, to the grounds, who are most affected, especially farmers, fisher folks, and women and children by the impacts of climate change. So these narratives uh, is important, no, for them to understand what's going on at the international level. And we have the money. We have the government should have the capacity to train farmers, to train women, to train the children, to give them support during this devastating typhoons, earthquakes, flooding. We have the money because we are given money by big corporations. And personally, I don't really agree with loss and damage, because it's just like saying, okay, we continue to pollute the earth, continue to damage your environment, but we're giving you money, so it's okay. So that's how I interpret it. And of course, many people, especially those who are protecting the environment, protecting the lives of the many communities, the indigenous communities, the human rights workers, they don't agree with that. But of course, our government will be like, okay, there's money, and with the integrity of our government in terms of corruption, it's very likely that this money that's coming in from the loss and damage fund are being funneled somewhere else. So that's just my opinion, but this is what's happening in our country. No? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. I have another question here. I mean, it's very much related to the contradictions that we live with in our everyday lives, about how do we navigate engaging in COP, which is a huge polluter itself, between everyone, activists including jumping on planes, overconsumption, wasteful building, and so on and so forth. Yeah, fair question, but just thought I would throw you another one in case you'd like to answer it.
Hi, Marta. My interpretation, I don't know. I can hear
Yes.
it. I don't know why it's not muted. But I wanted to take I guess the last question around, and that I saw in the chat, regarding what is important about this COP. So in many cases, all COPs are supposedly important. It's a decision and negotiating and decision-making spaces. Even though every year, there's some states who hold out on what decision is what language should be, etc. But some of the key things that are supposed to be huge at COP there's the GST, that they're supposed to deliver on the implementation of the GST. There's a lot of stuff around adaptation, in terms of thinking about what adaptation, the plan. There's supposed to be a new BLM action plan in terms of adaptation and what that looks like, and in terms of strengthening climate resilience. But I still believe that you can't truly strengthen that resilience without the true stakeholder engagement of communities, especially those on the ground. And then the same thing for mitigation. There are conversations I recognize around health a lot, in terms of how do you think about health in the context of climate change. One of the other things is supposedly the implementation of the NCQG, which is known as a new collective quantified goal. And that is also related to what is known as climate finance. So there's supposed to be a level of implementation, but again, that depends on states and how we decide to move forward. There's also always a conversation of 1.5 to stay alive in terms of adaptation and mitigation. So that would also be on the table. I'm sure the findings from the IPCC report for this year will also be there. But again, every year is about negotiating on something specific. A lot of times, I don't think states acknowledge that the level of negotiation then is towards what happens to those on the ground, especially who are most vulnerable. What I can say is in these spaces, as it's a negotiation space, civil society, sorry, not civil society, AOSIS, which is again Alliance of Small Island Developing States or Small Island States, there's always this very strong push that they must have something on the table or something that acknowledges the experiences of our small islands by the end of COP. I saw it in Baku when they spoke primarily to the negotiation around what was supposed to be the 300 million, which is less by now, for climate financing. But that doesn't mean that things haven't changed throughout the year, because there's negotiations that happen in June in Bonn, and then decisions, etc., and discussions happen in the lead up to COP. There are different texts out for the different articles or agenda items, etc. There's an agenda item out for gender and climate, but again, we can go in so hopeful and ambitious as we want to, have an ambitious climate movement, etc. But it depends on what comes out. I think that is one of the most challenging. I know someone asked something around holding institutions accountable. There's a lot of work that's been done around that. Firstly, starting with the UNFCCC by the different constituencies. As we said, there are 9 constituencies. So there's accountability or that has been done around that, but then there's also for them to go back and say, for example, again, the Loss and Damage Fund is up to them, the states who are involved or part of the board, to go back to the World Bank and, help them to make changes and make the process much easier. But also, I think sometimes it's a challenge because financial institutions, as we know, IFIs, they have their own specific protocols, their own guidelines, etc., of the way in which funding would happen, financing would happen, and a lot of times it's a debt process. For us in the Caribbean, we're doing a lot of things when it comes to climate financing in terms of debt to climate swaps. And my prime minister would say that there's one that they did this year, between last year and this year, that in their opinion has been successful. But again, you have to wait for the trickle down effect and see how it truly works. And again, there are a number of these different kind of mechanisms that are coming up. Barbados has proposed the Bridgetown Initiative. We're now at the Bridgetown Initiative 3.0. Again, it's supposed to be kind of like a debt relief mechanism that helps in terms of adapting and mitigating climate disasters at the benefit of those most vulnerable, but also at the benefit of government when it comes to financing. But again, we wait, we see. But yeah, what I will say is not that just this COP is important. I think COPs are important. I know that we struggle in terms of thinking about what civic space look like and how we occupy it, especially within the UN system or just in general multilateral systems or institutions. But when I worked very closely with project partners and pushed for them to be at COP, the funders at the time, feminist funders, recognized that there is an importance of why they should be there. And I was very articulate and particular in basically pitching that, because I attended the first year and I saw the reason for me to be present, but I also saw those communities who are much more vulnerable to be present, to engage, to get an understanding of what is happening at the negotiation level, and then being in country and not, seeing something rolling out and you're unsure of what it is. But I also do acknowledge what Rowena said, and also a lot of my colleagues often say that, women on the ground or communities on the ground, like say farmers, in some cases they're very unaware of what is happening at that international level. But again, I think that governments have a role to play in terms of building stakeholder engagement or building that engagement with communities, but also us as civil society, we have to, take a step back and think about how we better engage with our communities and help them in holding governments accountable and challenging them in the decisions that they make for the people that live in their countries.
Thank you so much, Marisa, for such a comprehensive response. We still have a bit of time, and I wanted to do something cheeky and ask a question that's related to some things that Mela and Rowena both work on. You both work on alternatives related to food, related to energy. I think my burning question is like, how can we continue amplifying and supporting this work amidst growing corporate capture of the climate policy spaces and the co-optation of radical narratives coming from climate justice movements that you've already mentioned.
It's like what I mentioned in my presentation, that we continue to struggle and we continue to fight the corporate capture, especially its impact on small scale producers or the marginalized sector. We have also civil society organizations should also work together to talk to the government, like what Marisa mentioned, that they should be responsible in giving information, in having all these loss and damages funds. So actually, that's what they should, that's what they're supposed to do as government, no. But of course, that we have to push for the government to do that, especially that we are now in climate crisis, and having or like telling people to be resilient is not really enough, or it's not working. Of course, we continue to work on with marginalized communities, with the farmers, with the women, and expose what's happening in during COP. Tell stories and what we have experienced during our participation. Have farmers, Tatay Lodi is one of our participants during COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, and he was quite overwhelmed with what's happening. He is a farmer, and he told us that not one farmer in our community knows what's going on here. So I have the responsibility to tell them the stories, to tell them what's happening, to campaign for food sovereignty, to campaign for climate justice, and to have their voices heard at the international and the national level. So he will continue campaigning for climate justice, continue exposing, what the inability of the government to give real solutions to the most vulnerable sectors of our society. So, and that that reflection from Tatay Lodi, and even from us, who also joined COP29, that is a big responsibility for us. Not everyone can join COP, so that's a big responsibility for us. And through this platform, like for example, the one that we are having right now, it's a big platform. It's a great opportunity for us to share the solutions from the ground, solutions from the practitioners themselves, what they can do, what is conservation, what is organizing themselves can do to push for the government, to push for big corporations to have real solutions. Yeah, so I think that we can do as a grassroots organization here in the Philippines. Of course, working together, building networks, alliances, that's also what we can do at the international level. So having this conversation is really a big opportunity for us to work together in Belém and in the coming COP in the following years. Yeah, thank you.
Meti, I just want to say, sometimes I feel as feminists, when we talk about alternatives, we imagine new things, but there are things that are already happening. We know how communities, indigenous communities, people who are living in the rural areas, they are living these alternatives we always talk about. They practice agroecology, though they may not say, hey, here we are, this is agroecology, but they do practice agroecology. And I think when we look at Africa, for example, the majority of the people in Africa, they live in rural areas. For example, Malawi has 80% of its population living in rural areas. Zimbabwe has 66%. The most urbanized city, one of the most urbanized cities in Africa is South Africa, but still it has a rural population. And now the way that the people are living their lives, they're living their lives in ways which are extremely sustainable. And I think this is the majority of the people living in ways which are very sustainable. But when we think about the majority as those who live in excesses, right? Those who would, and I would say, yes, we can talk about the greenhouse gas emissions associated with going to the COP. And yes, we can talk about, if we would attend the COP as activists, what would it mean in terms of the emissions? But for me, the real struggle is how do we make sure that people don't go to the COP in private jets? Because we all know they do. We all know how presidents, they hire the whole first class, the whole business class with their delegation. How do we call out that instead of questioning, an activist who is going on a plane where there are 300 people or 200 people, And so in terms of, and how do we call out the expenditure of the military? The expenditure of the military, the US military, the expenditure of the military in Israel, the expenditure of the military that is used in genocidal wars, right? And this is part of the climate crisis, because the climate crisis is not a crisis in isolation. It is also a crisis of democracy. It is a crisis within other crises. And I know that I'm one of the people who once boycotted the COP because I was thinking about, the excesses of the COP. And then I realized the more we don't go, the more the lobbyists are at the COP, and the more our voices are never heard, right? And some of these issues to be recognized, it takes a hell lot of time. I think Marisa may vouch for me on this one. When did we start talking about loss and damage? It was a long time ago. And only in Egypt, that's when they managed to put in place a loss and damage fund. But we had been putting so much pressure, and we are still putting pressure, for the countries that are supposed to pay the climate finance, to finance the climate crisis, that, loans is not climate finance, right? We want grants. We do not want our countries to be in debt when they face a climate-induced disaster. We do not want any African country, the small island countries, all island countries, to be in more debt because they are facing a climate crisis. So we need to be putting pressure inside and outside the COP. And right now, we had been talking so much within the AU space to say what Africa needs are reparations. And everyone used to caution us about the language. Everyone used to say, oh, Mela, that kind of language, if you put that kind of language, they are not going to listen to you. Your language is too strong, it's too radical. But now we hear that now the AU, this year they said, this is the year of reparations for African people. Because they think if we speak nicely to the polluters, they will not listen. And we need to call out the countries, we need to call out the institutions, we need to call out the lobbyists, we need to call out for solutions, because if we are not there to point out that the carbon markets are market-driven solutions that are going to drive us deeper into the climate crisis, I'm telling you, nobody else would. Our governments are going there to negotiate for green bonds. They are going there to negotiate with the transnational and multinational corporations. So I think anyone who has to be, any person, an activist like myself, like ourselves here, let us go to the COP. Let us meet inside. Let us meet outside. Let us go to the media center, to the media room. Let us have press conferences. Let us call them out. They will listen because they know what we're demanding. I think, yeah, we know we boycott and then we come back because we realize, okay, our space is being taken by some right-wing activists who are seeing the hope in market-driven solutions. Yeah, so that's enough of my propaganda. Over to you, Matthew.
Thank you so much for such a powerful intervention. We're almost at time, and I was wondering whether Rowena, Marisa, you had any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience.
I just wanted to add very briefly to what Mela said, that so she was talking about in terms of reparations, etc. One of the things that like the African and Afro-descendant movement has clearly stated, which is true, and as Mela said, the language is always like, it's too harsh, you can't say that or whatever, is that, that we can't have climate justice without reparative justice. And I think it is something that we mean to say, but we don't want to say it. We see climate finance as reparations, but again, as Mela said, a lot of times we're given it in loans. I'm really not sure what debt for climate swaps look like, but in our region and also the Pacific, where the Pacific, they more take global North funds. What I find in our region very recently is that we're taking out, well, not very recently, but within the last 4 to 5 years, we're taking a lot of funds from the MENA region. And us Barbados, we actually just took a loan more specifically. So as much as we're doing debt for climate swaps, we're still taking loans, etc. But again, this, I think, if we don't speak out and say us as a global south, we demand and we deserve reparations, I think that we also lose the fight in terms of what we deem climate justice. And this is a result of many things, especially from the global north, whether it's greenhouse emissions, whether it's the extractivism that continues, whether it's disposition, and also racial violence that we don't often talk about. All of these things has led to the huge levels of, resource use. I heard somebody very recently use the term resource assassination, where they would take the resources from especially the African continent and Asia, but then they would like burn the grounds, etc., which makes it difficult then for not people generally, but especially indigenous peoples to, take care and use their resources. But it's also a form of wealth accumulation, which we don't see because it's the accumulation for the global north, whereas they leave us devastated. But how can we more forcefully speak about these things? But also largely what we haven't mentioned that I will raise is in terms of also how do we stand in solidarity with a lot of our countries in the global north who are experiencing genocides. All of this is a part of climate justice that we're calling for, environmental justice, reparative justice, etc. Where does it end? Because genocide is also a bigger part of the issue. And we see it within these spaces, but how do we call it out? How do we stand firm, stand in solidarity? It really started majorly in Dubai at COP28, whereas, the whole issue of Palestine came up, and standing in solidarity proved hard. It proved challenging because there was also still the fear of you cannot say, you cannot speak up, you cannot stand in solidarity with these persons. And basically, kind of saying, who are they? Like, who are you standing in solidarity in? There's that constant policing. But again, if we as Mela said, we come to COP, we stand firmly, we raise our voices, etc. That's the only way to that governments can really see that we may be from different places, different parts of the world, but regardless, standing in solidarity, we're one. And you know that genocides, we don't agree with genocides, and we continue to push back. We continue to show power, and this is, you know, this is us being present for what we believe in.
Absolutely, Marisa. Thank you for that intervention. Rowena, any closing words from you?
Yeah. So thank you for this opportunity. You know, when we go to COP30, let's continue putting forward the real solutions from the ground, what's happening on the ground, and to continue having this layer of solutions from the ground to CS hosts having these conversations, to activists having leading the fight for climate justice and leading the fight inside COP. So I think that's very important. Well, we all know that this is not easy, no, for us activists, for CSOs, for grassroots organization, joining COP. But as Mela mentioned, this is important for us to join, for our voices to be heard. How small it may be, but you know, having all of our voices, amplifying the solutions, amplifying the calls, would make a huge difference, especially for countries, for organizations, for the vulnerable sectors. No? So I think having this kind of discussion, these conversations would help a lot, not only for COP30, but for, you know, we should continue having this. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you, our wonderful speakers, and to our wonderful interpreters, and for all of you for showing up today amidst these difficult times. I'm sorry that we weren't able to go through all of the questions that you've asked, but we're taking stock, and hopefully we can continue these conversations on our AWID community platform. And as we've heard, feminist climate justice is not just about adding a gender perspective to broken systems. It's about dismantling the systems that are killing us and building something entirely different in their place. And this was really a moment for us to learn from each other, to sharpen our strategies, and to remember that we can't afford to cherry pick one strategy over another, and that we have to simultaneously articulate our struggles across all geographies of resistance. And we hope that this can serve more as just another conversation, but really as a commitment for us to continue organizing in our communities, showing up in solidarity across struggles, challenging power wherever it shows up, and building the worlds that we know are possible. We'll still be we have some exciting materials that we will be sharing with you soon on feminist economic alternatives that can support advocacy on the inside and on the outside of COP30. So keep an eye out for that. And a few of us from AWID will be present in Belém. So please let us know if you're planning to be there too. We have a survey that has been dropped in the chat. And if you could fill it up, it takes just a few minutes, but it's important for us so that we can also amplify your activities and follow up with you, who will be, for those of you who will be there in person. And we will also share news about our 5 different resistance hubs located in Barbados, Pakistan, Nigeria, Cameroon, and the Philippines, who will foster community-driven solutions, amplify feminist demands all the way to Belém, and challenge the elitism of climate talks while building collective power across borders. And on that note, I will pass it over to Michelle for the actual closing.
Thanks, Marty, and a big thank you to all of our speakers, Marisa, Rowena, and Mela. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today. I think we've dropped the link to the survey in the chat box. You can also write your reflections in the chat if that's a little bit easier. It'll be useful for us as we put together other events as well. As folks write their messages write their reflections in the chat and take the survey. If there's one takeaway message for the folks here, what would it be? If anyone wants to jump in, like if there's something that comes to mind as everyone's saying goodbye, if there's a takeaway you want people to leave with, what would it be? You can think about it. Our next event, you can also type your answers in the chat. Our next event for AWIT members, if you'd like to come to our next event, it will be on October 29th, where we'll be launching Where's the Money, the Where's the Money report. Do look out for that. And if you want to get engaged, let us know at membership@awit.org. The email is in the chat box. You can send us an email. Thank you again, everyone, so much for joining us today, and
Thank
we
you
hope
so
you have
much.
a wonderful day.
Thank you.
And we look forward to
everyone.
seeing you at COP and on the journey there. Thanks, Marty.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Please do continue the conversation online on AWIT community.